everybody, and no. Hello, everybody.
Hey, Kevin.
And thanks for coming to, can y'all hear me okay? No? Okay, hello, everybody. Welcome to Extending HTML with Custom Elements. Before I get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to Rick and Doug and Tamar for continuing Southwest Fox this year. And for all the efforts that they've put into it all these years. And a quick shout out to Rick Borup on his first session today. I've always liked Rick's sessions, and one time I compared him to my favorite high school teacher because, for one, I really respected and admired this particular teacher, and two, no matter what day it was, whenever you walked out of his classroom, you had learned something that day. And I've learned something every time I go to one of his sessions. And Shannon, I've been waiting for you to speak for the last 10 years, ever since you did the Show Us Your Apps. And everybody was like, oh, cool, he'll be there next year. And every year when they do the speakers list, that's the first name I look for. So I was really glad to see you presenting today. So my name is Kevin Ragsdale, and I've been working with Fox Pro since 1993. So I crossed the 30-year mark last year, which makes me pretty much a newbie in this room and probably with most of the people who are remote. I've been very fortunate to have spoken at several conferences and user groups over the years. And for the last few years, I've been working for Bo Durbin at Zoom Geeks, and talk about learning something every day. Working with Bo has been a privilege for me because I've been able to learn something every day that I work with him. You will notice that I don't have any book references or magazine articles. Or has anybody heard of that website called LinkedIn?
Yeah. You wrote it? That's you?
No, I didn't write it. But so, Doug, LinkedIn is like Facebook for professionals. Okay? So that's important. But anyway, recently I have found that LinkedIn has named me an official LinkedIn expert, because every now and then they will send me something like this, and they will ask me to answer questions. And I feel really good. I don't know how LinkedIn even knows about me to ask me to answer all of these things. But if you think that was a fluke, I got another one. And, I usually try to help out, whenever I can. But this last one, it says, here's how you can overcome rejection and criticism as a software designer. I didn't answer that one. And I didn't answer that one because I've never overcome rejection or criticism. And if you don't believe me, ask Bo. But for that very reason, I won't be accepting any questions. So anyway, I've got that. One other thing, I did some modeling in the past. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that my silhouette was the model for the generic male avatar on the internet. And that looks just like me. It really does. If you don't believe me, I took a picture. And
is that from the front or the back?
Oh, that's from the front. That's from the front. So I'm very, very proud of those accomplishments. I'm a LinkedIn expert and a male model. But one thing that I'm not is Scoutmaster Kevin from Deadpool. Okay, I'm not Scoutmaster Kevin. So moving on, we'll look at our agenda. Today we're going to talk about HTML elements and custom elements. And involved with custom elements, we're going to talk about something called the lifecycle callbacks for custom elements. And we'll also look at getters and setters, the shadow DOM, which is what helps us and our custom elements to be encapsulated on the page. And of course, throughout the time, we'll be working on creating a custom element. So we'll jump right in. To start out with HTML, Tim Berners-Lee wrote about HTML tags back in 1991. So that's been around longer than I've been using Fox Pro. So it's been a while. There's over 100 native tags. or elements in HTML. The one thing that I should say is that I use the terms tags and elements kind of interchangeably. That's not correct. But if you hear me say tag, I may mean element. And if I say element, I may mean tag. Tag is just the markup that goes on the page with the angle brackets that kind of describes what the element is. And then anything that's within the opening and closing of those tags is part of the element. And it may have child elements and all that good stuff too. And one thing you'll probably notice about tags, HTML tags, is that they're always one word, one letter, one acronym, one abbreviation. There's no hyphens in a native HTML element name. So that brings us to the first rule on custom elements. A custom element name has to contain at least one hyphen. So it's sort of like a native HTML element. It's supposed to start with a lowercase alphabet or lowercase character for the first character. But it has to have one hyphen and has to have two parts, one around each of, or one around the hyphen. I'll put it that way. And except, the reason for that, of course, is because the tags, native tags, don't have a hyphen, but these do. And those are not so much, I guess, HTML elements, but they're considered to be hyphen containing elements based on other specifications. And that leads us to the scenario for today. This is when I first started really working on websites. I started with AngularJS. It was probably about 2012. And that's a JavaScript framework that really contains all the under the hood stuff for your web applications. It was very powerful, very fast. It had two-way data binding, so it made it look like, my pages were really interactive and all. And I found that I could prototype websites or web pages with AngularJS very, very quickly. And that really reminded me of Visual FoxPro, because that was one of the strengths of FoxPro, was how quickly you could prototype something. You prototype it, show it to the client. They're like, cool, let's go with that. And you're like, okay, I'll start the project. And they're like, no, I thought this was the project. So it's like, yeah, but there's nothing behind any of that. So now you got to pay me to do the work. So, but anyway, over time, AngularJS became deprecated, and Google came out with Angular 2. And when it came time to switch to Angular 2, all of a sudden it was based on TypeScript and component driven. And I didn't really know what was going on with it. First time I sat down and tried to use Angular 2, it felt just like that day in 1995 when I sat down with Visual FoxPro 3 for the first time. I was at 2.6 for Windows, and then I sit down with Visual FoxPro, and I'm like, I don't know what any of this is, right? So over time, I started thinking, well, I need to look at other frameworks, because frameworks typically make your development life a whole lot easier. And I looked at Vue, and then Vue 2, and then when Vue went to Vue 3, all of a sudden that was a paradigm shift. That was like Angular, AngularJS to Angular 2. And then it's like, well, do you look at Knockout or Svelte or React or what? And over time, it just kind of seemed like I'm dependent upon the framework. And I don't want to be dependent upon the framework. So I started using just vanilla JavaScript. And I love it because it's just, to me, it's powerful, and I'm in control of everything that I'm doing. And, there's libraries like jQuery, and they do lots of stuff and make things easier for you. But everything they're doing is they're doing vanilla JavaScript, in order to get their stuff done. So after being trapped in a cycle of analysis paralysis, trying to figure out which framework I wanted to use or anything, I just settled on custom JavaScript. So if, for instance, if I were to have someone come to me and say, look, I want you to create something for our web pages, and just show me a demo, and all I want is a button. And every time somebody clicks that button, I want it to update a number on the page. And I know that probably sounds silly for a demo. And I thought it sounded silly for a demo. You know, every time I see somebody doing it, I'm like, where are you going to do that? And then it dawned on me that you see that almost everywhere on e-commerce sites. In the shopping cart, whenever you place an order or when you're ordering items online, there's a little component with a little button. And when you click on it, it increments the number. You know, I want 3 of this, I want 4, you know. And so that's the demo that I'm going to show tonight. But if somebody was to ask me for that, let me jump out of here. Oops. Well, y'all found that out. Let's see. So anyway, if somebody asked me to do that, this is the page that I ended up with. It's just vanilla JavaScript with no framework, nothing fancy. And if I scroll up to get to the actual page for it, there's the code for it. Well, basically, I'll just show you. You click on the number, it updates the count. Click on the button, it updates the number. I hit reset, it goes to 0. That was some new functionality I threw in because I thought, you know, sometimes I didn't really think about like the decrement button, but you know, I thought reset would be good too. So you're either positive or you're 0. So
You could go right click. Decrement.
yeah, right click decrement. So this page is really simple. It just has the basic, the paragraph that I had up there. And I created a div. I called it my counter, and I put a little custom attribute on there, a couple of buttons, got the span where the number shows up. And then I went down to JavaScript on the page, and I did a document event listener DOM content loaded. Does anybody ever use jQuery in their web pages? That's the document ready function. So if you do document ready in jQuery, that's pretty much the same as doing this event listener. So this won't fire until the page has completely loaded into the DOM. And I just grabbed some references to the stuff that's on the page. And then I set the value of the little span for the number. Just set the text to whatever that custom attribute is, or 0. And the reason I do that is because somebody might forget to put the custom attribute in. So if it's not there, just make it a 0 from the get-go. And a couple of event listeners for the click. Every time I click on it, it adds 1. And you know, and then it updates that attribute. And then after that, we call this little counter that updates the count in the span. It looks like a lot of code. It kind of is for what it's doing. Then there's, you know, if you ask 100 Visual Fox Pro developers to give you an answer or a solution to one problem, how many answers are you going to get? But, yes. So the same way with everything else. You know, there's 50 million ways to do almost everything in JavaScript and Fox Pro or in anything else. So the only problem with this is, like, you look at it, the entire page is just 50 lines, but the only functionality in the page is that script and this div. So what happens if somebody said, okay, that's great. I love that counter. We want to put it on our website. Oh, okay. Well, you need to copy that div and paste it in your website. And you need to copy the script tag and you need to put it in your website. So the only downside of that is what happens when they put it on their web page and they already have an element named my counter or increment or value or reset. Then I just collided with their variables on the page. And I don't want to do that. And another thing is, what if they're like, well, it's all right, but it's kind of ugly. It's just gray. I mean, it's just not, there's no flash, no pizzazz to it, right? So that's no problem because I'm really good at CSS. So I'm going to put a line of Bootstrap in there. And so that's example 2. Look how pretty that is. Is that not nice? That's great. What's that?
Upcharge.
Upcharge, exactly, yeah. So I have lost my mouse. Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, Doug. I want to apologize to you for that joke earlier. Because it was, no, couple of years ago, I spoke at a conference, and well, it was more than a couple of years ago. It's before COVID, but I got like 2 evaluations that said it was okay, but he was a little condescending. And that was what I said about Doug earlier about the LinkedIn was a little condescending. So, Doug, condescending is when you talk down to people. Okay. So,
Is CSS in that code you're showing?
there is CSS. I added a style. Well, not in that code. In this code, this is the second example. I added a style sheet of just plain old Bootstrap. Everything else was the same. And, everything else was not the same because since I loaded Bootstrap, I thought, well, let's do some pretty buttons, right? So for the increment button, I wanted it to be the nice blue primary. So I added a class button primary, and I've got Bootstrap loaded. So it gives me that beautiful blue button. And then reset seemed like it would be one of those things that might be kind of destructive. So I was like, danger. So that's what that was for. So that's a Bootstrap class to just make a red button.
What source code editor are you using?
So what's that?
What source code editor are you using?
That's Visual Studio Code. And I've got the live server extension installed on it. So what I did was I opened a folder where I had all my demos and I clicked on one of the HTML files, and then down at the bottom of code, see where it says port 5500?
Yeah.
It says go live. So you click go live and it opens up your web browser right to your site running on localhost. So that way I don't have to worry about any bandwidth issues or anything when you're showing demos and stuff. And it's very quick. If I was to make a change in here, like if I said, we're going to make everybody start buying things at 5. It's either 5 or 0 or more than 5. So if I do a Control S to save it, the server automatically just reloads it. So it's very convenient when you're doing development work on web pages and stuff. So anyway, this at the end of the day is just putting lipstick on a pig. So it's there and it's functional, but I just added a dependency to my component. And that dependency is you better have Bootstrap, or if you don't, you should probably, if you want a blue button, you better have a class named button primary that turns the button blue, or you're going to have to add some new styling to your button and change the classes. And that's something that you really, really want to avoid is, that creep. I'm starting to get that bad smell, that Rick Borup was talking about. Smelly code, and it looks smelly, it feels smelly, and if you did tell somebody, all you got to do is copy and paste this into your page, somebody's going to do something wrong, somebody's going to forget something, and so what I want is a solution that's more HTML-y instead of smelly, and that I just made that up. I'm pretty smart. So anyway, if you want like a custom element, we'll go over to number 3 and look at that. This is a custom element and it actually works. I can increment and I can reset, and it's ugly just like the first example was, but look at the HTML.
Is there a hyphenated tag somewhere?
There's a hyphenated tag right there. And if you want, I can do this. It's a hyphenated tag called my counter. And I don't even have anything in there, to say, put the buttons in, make it increment, make it decrement, not decrement. I didn't add that, but don't reset it, And it's very, very simple. So basically I've got 2 lines of code here. One is the tag and the other is this script type module. And the source is mycounter.js. And the cool thing about that is the myCounter.js is my custom element. And it's just a JavaScript file. So if I just kind of scroll, I'm just going to start up there at line number 1 and scroll all the way down to line 80. The really cool thing is that I just replaced a 50-line HTML file with that's the wrong one, but you know what I mean? It was like a 20-line HTML file. You know, I replaced 50 with a 20, and then I added 80 lines of JavaScript. But as you'll see, it's pretty cool when you do that. So we'll bounce back over to, there you go. With custom elements, it feels more HTML-y. And one thing that I like about that is, you know, web development, HTML is so ubiquitous these days. You know, almost everybody knows about HTML tags. You know, my Uncle Joe, you know, knows how to build a web page, and he knows how to type it out in Notepad, you know, because he knows the tags and stuff like that. If I give him an element like that, I say, just use this tag and reference this script, and boom, it just works. So that's kind of cool to me. And like I said, custom element is a JavaScript class. And as object-oriented developers, FoxPro developers, class is a word that everybody knows. You know, I mean, your ears kind of prick up. You're like, class, I think I could work with that. And what it creates is an encapsulation of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, via the Shadow DOM. We'll talk about the Shadow DOM in a little bit, but basically what the Shadow DOM is an eggshell that goes around the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that eggshell protects your element from the rest of the page, from the rest of the DOM. But it also protects the DOM from your element. So your element doesn't mess with the outside of the page doesn't mess with the outside of your element. And what I really like, as far as the example, like the shopping cart, if you built a custom element that was the incrementer, decrementer display for a shopping cart, then all you need on every page is a little tag and a reference to the JavaScript that runs it, or that is it, basically. Custom elements have lifecycle callbacks, which are basically like built-in events that happen. And we'll talk about those as well as we go through. The basic for a JavaScript class definition is that right there. And my counter is the name of the class, and it extends HTML element. So basically, HTML element is the base class of every one of these classes that I'm going to build for custom elements. The reason I say that, there is a way to extend native elements, and that's called like customized built-in elements. But Safari and WebKit never implemented it, and they said they never will. And usually when one of the major browsers says they never will, then eventually over time that starts getting deprecated among other browsers. So to me, it's like, I don't want to extend a select element from HTML. I don't want to extend an unordered list or a UL from there in my class definition. I'm just going to extend HTML element, and then I could build my select, my custom select or so within the class. And looking at that definition, it kind of looks like this in Visual FoxPro, as everybody knows. Define class, my counter. In this case, I did as custom, just as the base class for this particular class. HTML element is like the mother of all base classes for custom elements. And then, of course, this last curly brace is just your end define. So that's pretty simple. All of these classes have a constructor method, and that's just, you know, it looks like a method basically with the opening and closing tags, which in Visual FoxPro is like the init, you know. So when it's easier for me to learn and remember stuff, you know, for the new stuff that I'm doing, if I can relate to how I did it in FoxPro. So, and one thing that you've got to know whenever you're extending HTML element, which in this session, that's all we're extending today is HTML element. In the constructor, the first thing you want to do is call super. And what that does is calls your base element, which is HTML element. And basically at that point, all of its global attributes and, you know, methods and things like that are available to your new class. So that would be sort of like a do default, you know. So it's just that instead of doing a do default on the custom, whatever the Fox Pro object is, it's just do default like on my big global base. I guess we could take a look at that a little bit more. I'll jump back into here. Can everybody see that okay if I go down one? Yeah. Okay.
Alt-Z will give you word wrap if you want it.
What's that?
Alt-Z will give you word wrap if you want it.
Nah, that's okay. But thank you though. I didn't know that. So basically here's my class definition for the counter that I just showed a minute ago. There's my constructor, there's my super. And that's one reason I had so many lines of code here is because I put comments in there because I comment all my code.
You do?
All the time.
You should get a thumbs up for that.
Thank you. I'm kidding. I commented and 6 months later I go back and I'm like, what does that mean? I have no idea. Yeah. What idiot wrote this? Oh, it's me.
No, I wouldn't say that.
So anyway, there's one other thing that I can do in the constructor, and that's attach the shadow DOM, which creates a new property, I guess you would say, on your class called the shadow root. And to do that, you call the attach shadow method. And when you call the attach shadow method, you have to send in a mode object, and the mode is open. And the reason the mode is open is because I want to be able to manipulate my class from external JavaScript if I need to. If you do, you can do open or closed. If you do closed, you can't do anything with external JavaScript. And usually as soon as you load your page, well, let's do it. Why not? I don't know why I keep looking there. I've got it right in front of me. So we'll go to back to this page, and I'm just going to do an inspect. And I know nobody can see that, so I will zoom in when I need to for that. This is that class, and there's my element, and there's this thing called the shadow root and window plus. Hey, does that look any better?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So there's my element on the page, and there's a thing called shadow root. And that is the eggshell around everything that I've got within that tag. And, there's my div, there's my buttons, my span, all that good stuff. If I were to come back over here and say closed, save, and we'll bounce back over. Sorry, now I've got it magnified and now I can't see what I'm doing. So. Let's go to the console. Oh, well, I guess the first thing you would notice, when minus, is that there we go. So the first thing you notice is the page reloaded, and it's got the header and the paragraph that I had on the page, but my button's gone. I got no buttons, I've got no span, and the reason is because of this error. And this is, I make fun of Doug, but today I overheard him giving this magnifier shortcut to someone, and I had never heard of the Windows plus and the Windows minus. So I make fun of Doug, but sometimes I learn from him too. So. But basically it's saying I can't set the properties of null because it's setting the inner HTML. And if I go back here, the inner HTML is what I put into the shadow root, into the shadow DOM. So I put the HTML that I wanted to display on the page for that element in the shadow root via the inner HTML. When it was closed, it can't be seen. It's shut off from the world. You talk about encapsulation. Once you do a closed mode, you're totally encapsulated, and it's next to impossible to debug. So any example, tutorial, article you might see about Shadow DOM will always have mode open. So I've never seen one that actually demonstrated why I would want a closed one. Any questions yet? I know I said I wouldn't take any, but. Can I do that?
Repeat the question.
Well, I don't know. Oh, the question was, can I open the shadow DOM and shove the HTML into the inner HTML and then close it? And the answer is, I don't know. So I don't think so. Because I think when you're calling the attached shadow, well, I guess you could call attached shadow again, but I'm not going to try it now because I blue screened right before I started the this session. So I don't really want to. I don't want to go there. So any questions about the shadow DOM other than, is there something I can do I don't know how to do?
Refresh as the error goes away, right?
Oh yeah, I didn't do that. If I do a Control S back over here in Visual Studio Code to save it, boom, it's open and it just threw it in there. So I guess interactively, Rick, I can open it and see it and then close it and save it and not see it and then open it and save it and see it again. So I'll probably try that. So. Okay, so anyway, that's sorry, I totally forgot where I was at. So. Okay, so that's the shadow DOM, and that kind of like demonstrates what the encapsulation of it is. And like I said, you add the shadow DOM to your element using the attach. Well, you don't add it, you attach the shadow DOM to your element. And basically, if that's the shadow DOM and the rest of the document DOM can't really see or penetrate it, so to speak, that would make the other DOM the light DOM, if you think about it. So you got light DOM, which is your regular DOM in your document, and then the shadow DOM, which can't really be seen. So what I did here was, like I said earlier, I just threw some HTML in there, and basically I just copied the same code that I had in the previous examples. The biggest difference is that I used the variable notation here. And so I've got a property called count. And the other cool thing with JavaScript classes is that I have a this keyword, so which we all know about as well. So I'm just saying that whenever this span shows up, throw this count into that span and it'll just print it right out. And we'll get to, well, I guess I better do observed attributes. There's a thing called observed attributes. And what that is if you want to perform some kind of action, or if you want to know if an attribute of your element has changed, you can observe it by putting it in this array, which is right here. It's basically a static property of custom elements called observed attributes. And you return an array of attributes that you want to observe. And in this case, I want to watch the count attribute, which, if you remember, when I put the element on the page, there could be an attribute called count. So now we'll get into the life cycle, which I guess I need to go back here. Shadow DOM.
Quick question, Kevin.
Yeah.
Is there any other attribute of the shadow root besides inner HTML, which we're interested in?
Yeah, you can do, you can use templates, which template is like a tag or element that you can use that it's on the page, but it's not used or processed at all until you act upon it with JavaScript. And so basically it's really good for like repeatable blocks of HTML. But with those, you can always, with your shadow DOM, and we'll see this later. I've got some examples of that, where you can append, you clone node on the template and append the child to the shadow DOM. And then that becomes your HTML. There's a lot of ways you can actually get the HTML in there. Inner HTML is the easiest way to demonstrate it, because I can just type it right there in the page and it's there.
You might want to share that question with the remote folks, because they have no idea what I asked.
Sorry about that. And
No, you don't apologize. You apologize.
the question was, are there any other attributes of getting the HTML into the shadow DOM? So all that stuff I just said a few seconds ago, that's what I was talking about. The shadow DOM is incredibly powerful, and sometimes it can be very frustrating. And if you're wondering, when I first started working with custom elements, I had a head full of hair. Now, I'm not saying that it was the shadow DOM that did it, but it didn't help none. That's for sure. So we're getting into the life cycle methods. These are built into the Custom Elements API. If you're wondering how old Custom Elements are, they first started talking about web components back in 2011. So that's what, 13 years ago? They had the first specification for Custom Elements in 2014. And then they had the first actual implementation of it in 2016. So it's been around. Custom Elements is a part of the web components web standard. So, sorry, got to get some more. So the first one we should talk about is the connected callback. And that fires whenever your element has been added to the page. When it's been added to the DOM, this method fires automatically. You can do all kinds of stuff in the connected callback. What you would typically do, like in the constructor, is the first thing you want to do in constructor is call super. And then if you're going to create a shadow DOM, you want to attach the shadow and all that stuff. In connected callback, it's a good place to put event listeners for like any buttons or something or any other element that you may put into the shadow DOM. And it's, you know, like I said, it's sort of the constructors like the init, and the connected callback is like, let's, you know, just follows right along, and you can set up your environment through there. Disconnected callback is the exact opposite. That fires when the element is removed from the page. It's a good place for cleanup, I guess, and where you can remove the event listeners and things like that you created in the connected callback. And we'll see these in the examples. Attribute change was the one that I started talking about a few minutes ago. We'll take a better look at that. And that one is just when I'm watching an attribute and I want to know if it's changed, that fires whenever one of my observed attributes changes. Adopted callback means the element has been moved to another document, and I've never seen it. I've never done it. And that's all I'm going to say about that one tonight. So there's also a thing that we can do with our JavaScript classes with like getters and setters. And what they do is they read or get properties, return the property value to you, or they can change or set the properties. And I heard it mentioned there, I think during Rick's session earlier tonight, that, you know, getters and setters are sort of like access and assign. And to me, they are. That's how I picture them. You know, the neat trick with those is that you can actually hide the property from like the implementation, and your getter and setter could be a different name, but you act upon that property internally inside of those. And we'll take a quick look at an example of that. Okay, so I did our observed attributes. This is our connected callback, and in this instance, I created a variable called shadow and referenced this shadow root. And the only thing that I get from that is I don't have to type this shadow root every time I want to do something in here. So I just do shadow, and I get my increment button, and I put a click event on it. And my reset button, I put a click event on it. And all I told it to do was whenever somebody clicks the increment button, call this increment method. I'm going to have a method called increment. And in this instance, I want to do bind this. And what happens is if I had actually told it in the event listener to just call that method, it would call the method with the click event. So then within that method, I've got to do like the event current target is the button that was clicked, and then I can act on that. But somehow I need to work my way back up and find out who's the parent of all of this, you know, my custom element. If I bind this, I'm sending in that custom element instead. I'm like, hey, we're just worried about me. And I hope I'm describing that nicely. There's the example of the disconnected callback where I'm just undoing the things that I did earlier. And this time I didn't do a variable for the shadow root. And so I ended up typing this shadow root, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, Patrick.
There's a property that when you hit increment and incremented by 1, is there like a property in that?
Yes. Yep, we're working our way down to it.
Oh, sorry.
So, no, that's cool. He was asking if there was a property, like when I'm incrementing a property, He was asking where the property is. So what I've got is I'm looking for an attribute called count. And when I say the attribute, that means on the HTML page where it says my dash, what do I call it? My counter. There can be an attribute called count, and it can be a number. So what happens is if that number, or if that attribute changes, or if the number changes, then this attribute change callback is going to fire. And like I said, your observed attributes are an array of attributes that you may be watching. In this instance, we're only watching one, so I could just pretty much know that if the attribute change is named name or named count, then I'm going to act on it. If you had several attributes that you're watching, you would need to check the name on all of them. When it comes in, it comes in with a name, the old value of the attribute, and a new value. When it first gets attached to the page or first instantiated, it's usually null. And then if you've actually set a value on the attribute, like in the HTML, then the first time this fires, it'll go count, null, 0. Yeah. And then once I increment, it'll be count, 0, 1. So, and all I'm doing here is just checking, okay, I want to make that value a number no matter what. And then if my number is not a number, then it's a number. And we want to update our count, right? So, sorry, I got myself confused there. Right? And we'll get to the update count in just a minute. I've got a lot of console logs in here where it just kind of spits out in the console log. It'd be a lot easier if you guys were to run the demos like on your own browser. You'd be able to see it, and I wouldn't. And you won't have to do the window plus to be able to see what it says. But it just shows you as it's working along what it's doing in the log. Here's our getter for our count property. And one thing you'll probably notice is that I never did set up a count property. And so what happens is if I reference count, and in my mind, if I access the count property, it's going to send back the number version of the attribute for count. It's going to call get attribute count. If there is no count, it's going to return a 0. So that way I'll always get a number back. It's either going to be 0 or it's going to be whatever the value of my count number is. And when I change it, it calls the set, which in my mind is the assign. And so we're going to send in the new value, and it's going to set the attribute count. So the weird thing is I didn't really define a property called count. I defined an attribute called count, but I'm watching that attribute. So every time it changes, I'm updating my property at the same time, kind of back and forth. They just stay in sync. Every time I increment, if the attribute goes to 7, my count property is 7. If it gets reset to 0, then my count property is 0. So I'm not actually having to call code in my later method like update count by saying, hey, get the attribute of the count and tell me what it is, and then run all that code. This is handling all of that automatically for me. And then, of course, I said when the attribute changes and it is a number, call the update count method, send in that value, and all it does is looks in the shadow root and says, find that span that had the ID of value and make the text content this value. So it started out as 0, and I clicked increment. It changed the attribute to 1. That changed the property to 1, and that called update count and said, hey, replace that span with a 1. So that's the custom element. Or actually, it called the increment method, and it updated my property. Duh. Oh, so I just told you the exact opposite of what I was going to tell you a second ago. It calls the increment method, updates my count property, which goes to the set count, which sets the attribute. So we're working on the property and syncing the attribute to the property. So just erase what I said there for a couple of seconds. Our reset method is easy. We set this count to 0. The last thing you got to do when you're working with custom elements, there's a custom elements API and that the web browsers know, and you have to define your custom element. And to do that, you call custom elements.define. That's the custom elements API define. And this is the name of your tag, my counter. And then this is the name of your class, my counter. So when I reference that file in my HTML, I've got to stop looking over there when I've got a perfectly good screen in front of me. In my HTML down here where I did script module equals my counter JS, the reason I did type equals module is that's a way to tell the web browser, don't treat this like it's a normal JavaScript file. Treat it like it's a module, like it's using ES6 modules, and ES6 is like ECMAScript 6, and ECMAScript is JavaScript. What it is the newer JavaScript. It supports imports and exports, which we will also get to because that improves your code modularity. You know, being able to share the code, spread it around in different places. Now, that is supported in virtually every newer browser that's out there. So I don't have to do anything special with it. I just can do all this new stuff and say type module and go. And it's really neat. It's not supported in Internet Explorer.
I never heard of that.
Exactly. But some people have. And there are what they call polyfills, which is just other JavaScript files that will basically transpile your ES6 code, JavaScript. It will transpile it down to code to JavaScript that Internet Explorer browsers can operate on. I think Google had started that kind of work with the polyfills and stuff. They're very popular. People use them all the time. I'm not, because I don't care about Internet Explorer. And, you know, I don't know, that probably sounds, you know, I'll put it this way. If somebody tells me I got to make it support Internet Explorer, it's like the cartoon where the guy calls technical support and the support says, okay, what browser are you using? And the guy's like, well, that's a stupid question. Windows XP. And so when people say, are you supporting Internet Explorer? That's what I'm hearing in my head is, well, that's stupid. It's Windows XP. So any questions? I kind of covered a lot there. I kind of like breezed right through all that.
Can you just pop your my counter JS up again just for 1 minute?
My counter, yeah, I'm looking over there again. So, yeah,
Sorry, just go back up
to the top.
or at least where you're populating the meters.
Oh, right here. Yeah. So basically, I'm setting IDs on them, so it makes it real easy for me to say this shadow root get element by ID. You don't want to say document get element by ID because the shadow DOM doesn't know about the document, right? So if I say, you know, shadow root get element by ID, it doesn't know about any other thing in the main document. They could have, in this instance, you could have an object called increment, an object called value, an object called reset on the main DOM or main document page, and it won't collide with this element because this element only talks to everything within its shadow DOM.
It's local scoping.
Basically, that's it. Well, that's what module gets you as well. So I probably should have said that when I did type equals module. When the web browser treats it as a module, then you get local scoping, so to speak. You don't have global scoping on it. And the other thing is I see a lot of tutorials where people will defer the script, you know, with a defer attribute. They'll do script, source equals blah, 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 defer. When you do type equals module, it automatically is deferred. So like the rest of the page loads and then it comes in and does its thing, you know, and pretties it up and does its work for you, if that makes any sense. Now hop over, see where we're at.
Show us where he had the count incremented with the plus. I saw
Oh,
that.
yeah. So what happens when they click the increment button, like right here? Whenever you click it, it's going to call this increment. And so when it comes down to this increment, it says this count plus plus. So I just add 1 to the count. And then what it does is I set the count to 1. So we set the attribute for the object to that value. Then the next time you reference this dot count, it's going to call the getter and it's going to return whatever the attribute value is. which to me is kind of cool, but to a lot of people, it's very boring. I tried to explain it to my wife. She didn't care. You know? Sorry. This brings me to an issue called styling, but before we do that, I should probably look at a couple of more demos just in case. And I apologize for bouncing around so much. So, oh, my custom element, the one that we just looked at, that's boring too, right? I mean, that's like just like the original one that I did. And we got the increment, the reset, it all works. It's beautiful to me. But what if we wanted to add Bootstrap to that? Okay, cool. You can see it changed, and we got the Bootstrap, basic Bootstrap stuff all up here in our text, which is in the light DOM, which is the page. But when it comes down here, all of a sudden it's whatever the native element gets. So I've got Bootstrap loaded on the page, but it didn't go through to my element, which at the end of the day is a really good thing, because I don't want the rest of the page to mess with my element, just like my element doesn't want to mess with the rest of the page. I can do my own styling for just my element. And we'll take a quick peek at that. And basically that's it right there. I loaded in Bootstrap. I've got the light DOM here and then my custom element, and the light DOM got the Bootstrap. My custom element did not. And there, of course, I'm just referencing. I did get the span.
No, the counter text is actually sans serif. It shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah. Well.
It shouldn't be because the default style sheet is.
Sort of,
Yeah.
sort of repeat the question.
I'm sorry.
Repeat
Say
the
it again.
question, sort of for the.
Sort of. All right. Say it again, Rick. I'm sorry. I can't. All right. Let's go back and look at the page. Right. That 0 looks different, right? Like these are these Arial? I guess I could check. Good night. Oh yeah, that's true. Let's go to example 3. Oh, it looks, yeah, it looks, you know what? It looks, it's not, it's not the same. I'll show you. Let me do a Control+. Get rid of this. You don't think that's Times New Roman there? No. Oh no, not the buttons. The buttons are whatever the native style sheet, user agent style sheet is. Yeah. And we were discussing the text, the span element in the middle where the number is what font is that? Did it actually get Bootstrap? Did it not get Bootstrap? Is it the native user agent style sheet or what? And well, the BTN, the buttons are not going to get it. The buttons will never get it. There are things called inheritable styles where if you have like a texty element, like a span or something like that, it may pick up those styles from the DOM. So I told you, there's an eggshell and nothing gets through, except sometimes things get through. See that hair? So I don't know if you guys can see my hair, but that's why. So.
That's what the placenta is for. Thank you for laughing.
So anyway, that's yeah, I'll get like a little bit deeper in there, but it's one thing that I really hate talking about. So thanks for asking about it. Well, I appreciate it, Rick. You owe me. Yes, that's Okay, so like I said, it's the most frustrating part of the Shadow DOM is styling. And there's a thing called inheritable styles, which I just mentioned a second ago. And there's a thing called piercing the Shadow DOM. And that's where the texty type elements that I was talking about, the styling from the DOM may actually bleed through to the Shadow DOM. And we'll see examples of that as I get further along. And this is why I really don't like messing with styling. Because have you ever made one little tweak to a CSS, and then you reload your page and you're like, what happened? And that's the perfect explanation of it. So my best thing with CSS is if I find something on the internet that I like, and I like the way it looks, I find the CSS and I steal it, right? So I do very little original CSS.
Plagiarism.
Look at that. We're at our summary and we've only looked at 4 demos. And now I've got to figure out what the next demo is. So, oh, this one was the same one with, was that the one with Bootstrap? Yeah. Piercing the Shadow DOM. Okay, I did example 4, which was that one. 2, 3, 4. Custom element and Bootstrap with adopted style sheets, which is something that I haven't even talked about yet, but check this out. These are actually Bootstrap buttons that came through. Oh, you know what? I need to get rid of. Okay. Sorry about that, y'all. Close. All right, these are actually Bootstrap buttons, and of course the page also has Bootstrap. And if we look at the HTML, we've got, let me get rid of, I have a little different thing in my counter here. And the difference is in the connected callback. And what I did in the connected callback was I got a reference to my shadow root, so I wouldn't have to type it out. And I did a fetch on the actual Bootstrap CSS that's sitting out on the web server. And then when it got that CSS back, I called the new CSS style sheet, and then I shoved that CSS into the sheet. And then the Shadow DOM has an adopted style sheets method that I say, you know what, my adopted style sheet is this CSS that I just got a hold of. And I was able to get Bootstrap buttons, on there. They didn't really look like Bootstrap buttons. So we'll do a class equals BTN, and we'll make this one success. Like that. And drag this guy back over. I'm going to do a Control S. And boom, my button just changed. But this is the exact same as the previous example I did where it was like, well, great, I just added a dependency. Because anybody that uses this version of my counter had better have Bootstrap CSS, and it better be on the in the lib folder of your root website and Bootstrap, subfolder and CSS subfolder. And if it's not exactly that, it's never going to get in there. So if I do, whoops, let's just comment this part out.
I like the green.
You like the green?
Look, my favorite color. See?
Mine too, because all my comments are green. Oh, he just said that he loved the green text on there. So if I do a Control S, all of a sudden I'm back to those original buttons. So yeah. That's the user agent style sheet. I guess that's what they call it, something like that. So if I'm just going to bounce around and do some more examples. I've got, do I go till 6:30?
Yes.
6:30. Okay. Thank you. If I want to.
A question about the browser. Is that inside Visual Studio Code, or you got two?
No, this is on the right side is just Google Chrome.
It's just not part of it.
No. The this over here just has an extension that runs a little web server, and and
Like
it's
you said, the
running a
5,000
local host.
thing, right?
Yeah, the 5500 port 5500.
Yeah, sorry, 55.
Yeah.
Right.
So adopted style sheets, what you can do is you can actually do a string literal of just create your own CSS text and use that as CSX text and do the adopted style sheets and say, boom, there it is. There's my styling. But you can also do that within your template for the shadow adopt. Yes, Rick.
So I have a double question. So if you take that fetch and you put an invalid URL there, or it doesn't exist, is it real?
Oh, that's a good question because,
And then
oh,
the second part of that is which leads right into that. What happens?
okay. What he asked was if this fetch actually goes to say a bad URL and an error occurs, what happens? And I don't know because I don't test for failure. I test for success.
Oh, you killed me.
And unfortunately, Bo knows that as well. So did you test it? Yeah, I tested it. Works for me. So let's just change. We'll just change a couple of things here, and we'll do a. Well, where were we? Bootstrap and adopted style sheets.
Rick's question was,
The second question was what happens, right? Or
What happens and then what happens?
oh, what happens with errors in general?
I don't know if the fetch will-
You know, I've never actually had an error, so I mean, we'll find out together. I'm just going to go ahead and run it.
pretty close to the monitor, it might be dangerous.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so I did a change. I uncommented it, and we're going to save it, and it's going to try and do a fetch on the Bootstrap.
BT script.
Save. Oh, look at that. Okay, so the rest of the page did get the Bootstrap because it's referenced in the page. This is exactly the same as it always was.
You probably have an error.
And I probably do. Well, I've got a 404. I'm sure I do. Failed to load resource. The server responded with, what do I do? Plus? 404 not found. So it's a silent error, basically.
So then the second part is if you have a real error, so if you try to do something to annul it.
Oh, yeah. That's why I do optional chaining. So, no, I'm kidding. No, yeah, you do have to do a lot of error handling for these, for the demos. I haven't really. What's that? Breaks the component. Same. I would say it's the same thing as any JavaScript. Yeah. I miss a parenthesis and boom, my page doesn't work anymore. You know, what'd you do? Oh, I don't know. So.
Well, in that case, just the component that everything else should still work.
Everything else on the page would work. Yeah, I'm talking about like JavaScript in general. Yeah, I killed a lot of pages a lot of times. So, all right, how am I going to get out of this? Windows Escape. I'm doing Windows minus. I'm just making everything smaller. Sorry. Thank you, Doug, who's a lot smarter than me. Okay, so anyway, I hope that kind of answers the question. You know, in all fairness, I did say no questions. So I did talk about with type equals module that you have the ability to import and export your JavaScript class. And so we'll look at example 5 here. The page is exactly the same as the rest of those examples. But one thing it does is it's referencing index.js, not mycounter.js. And so what I'm going to do here is take a look at index.js and clean some of this up. Stop missing my page here. Okay, this JavaScript file has 2 lines. Basically, it's saying import the myCounter class from the myCounter JavaScript file. And then this file is calling the custom elements API with the define method and saying, You know what? I want to call this my new counter. I don't want to call it my counter. We'll just call it my new counter, but I'm still referencing the my counter class. And that means if I'm going to import here, that means I've got to export from here. So in this case, I just say export class. Everything else is exactly the same. Export class, my counter extends HTML element. I got all the same code I had before. The biggest difference is that earlier, after the class definition, I called the custom elements API to just define it from within this page. I commented it out. And that's why we did it over in the index.js. And that way I was able to rename my element to something else. I could call it anything I want. Like if Doug wrote a really cool element and say it was like SF hyphen super cool element. And I really like that element. And I was able, and he exported that class and I was able to import it. Then I could change it to KR hyphen super cool element. And the reason I say that is because I had a job once and I got a bonus because I took a lot of those SF controls from all his articles that he did over the years. And I renamed them all to KR. And my boss was so impressed. The hardest part, though, was that I had to run Beautify on it to make all the Visual Fox Pro keywords uppercase, you know, like normal humans do. But anyway, this is the page, and there is my element. It's exactly the same as it was before. It's just that this time I imported it, and I did the custom elements. I could have just as easily done the custom elements, you know, anywhere else. I could have done it within the page here, the define. I just happened to do it in the index page where I imported it from.
Is one methodology more efficient than the other?
I think the way that I've got it is good. It kind of makes it modular, you know, more modular. Oh, is there a methodology that's like more efficient, so to speak? And the probably is a better way. But I don't know what it is. So, all right. I'm going to breeze through a couple of demos because I took a lot longer to talk. Multiple instances. Hey, what if I've got an HTML page and I want 4 of these counters on there? Well, that's cool. You can put 4 of them on there because they're all independent of one another. They're independent of the page. They're independent of each other. And you can see I actually set some, some count attributes on some of these. And one of them, I didn't even put a number in. I just said, cool. And if you remember earlier, when it checks to see what the attribute is, and it does that whole, if this value is not a number, then use it. Otherwise, make it 0. You know, if the attribute is a number, use that number. Otherwise, make it 0. So it just took cool and made cool 0. I can increment, I can reset, I can increment these, reset, increment, and they don't affect the other one. One thing I don't like about it is it's kind of ugly too, because these are block elements. I had done it as a div inside the shadow DOM. So they're just block elements and they go on the next line. There's no padding, there's no styling, there's nothing to it. And so what we can do.
So they all call the same increment function, but they know more it points back to what, correct?
Yep.
So it's dot count, we're all dot count.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah.
Right? Dot count plus, all of them.
Yeah, they're all doing the exact same code. And I only had to import that index.js file once. So, yeah. So one thing I can do is come in here to my styles and uncomment this handy little style tag that I had to put in the element. And you can guess what this is going to do. It's going to separate all of these elements by 15 pixels, starting at the bottom of each element. So, well, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to drag it over, and I'm going to do a control save, and boom, it just loads them exactly like I asked it to. I put the style in the actual element. So that's how I can style it in line.
In the JavaScript.
Okay. Yes, in the JavaScript. Yeah. And we're going to quickly run through these here. Oh, I built a speakers page that had all the speakers from Southwest Fox. And It's just calling a different JS file that I had, or a JSON file that I had set up. And the biggest difference there was, I just had to put different code in there. When I do the connected callback, I set up my Shadow DOM and I call this function called fetch and populate speakers. It grabs that JSON file. When it gets it back, it walks through each one of those speakers and calls add speaker. And then it uses a template that I've got and clones it and then appends it to the shadow root. And I hate to say it so quickly, but it's all in the demos, in the session materials. So finally, there was a couple of styling demos that I should probably look at. And I'm really sorry to the folks who are watching remotely and are having to see the side of my head because I'm not looking at my screen. I keep looking at the projector. With styling, where I was talking about, I do another speakers page. I added a URL attribute to the same element. And this time I asked it to go grab a different JSON file, which in a real life instance would be make a different API call. And this is the organizers page. So it called a different file, pulled them all in, and did the exact same thing that it did before. So that was that. And styling. This is an example of a light DOM button where I did some styling. This is example 10. Okay. I've got an index HTML file. Why am I looking over there? Okay, I've got a style set for button background pink on my main document page. So any button that's in the light DOM gets a pink background. And you see, here's my element. It's called example element. And inside of there, I added a button. And inside that element, inside the template, I have a thing called slot. And then I have an actual button that's part of the shadow DOM. Slot gets replaced by whatever light DOM you have in the page. It gets shoved in there. It got the pink background. The shadow button, which was already built within my shadow DOM, it just remained gray. So I guess I should summarize. Question? Let me finish up real quick and we'll do it in the Q&A if that's okay. So I'm almost at the very end. What you learned today was just a quick introduction to custom elements, and I hope it's not too confusing. How they can make things easier and more HTML-y and less smelly. And some limitations of custom elements that could trigger anger management issues. So,
And loss of hair.
and loss of hair loss. I opened the wrong PowerPoint file because I had a whole slide for Doug. And now I feel terrible. But what I will say before I finish is today's Doug's birthday. And hey, there you go. Yeah. And my birthday was last week. That's how I always remember his birthday. His birthday's a week after mine. Last week, I celebrated the 40th anniversary of my 18th birthday. And today, Doug is celebrating the 50th anniversary of his 16th birthday, which means he's old enough to be like my grandfather, I think.
Same age.
Or something like that. Anyway, thank you very much. If anybody does have any questions afterwards, feel free to ask me anytime. You can send me email. You can call. I think my phone number is even in the white paper. So anytime. So that's it.